Hello and good afternoon. I am Scott Nemeth and I am head of global leaderships here at the McCain Institute, which means that I have the distinct privilege of leading the Institute's work in supporting leaders around the world who serve causes greater than themselves by defending democracy and freedom, and who truly embody Senator McCain's legacy of character-driven leadership. We do this primarily through our flagship program, the McCain Global Leaders, which works to advance democracy, freedom, and human rights at home and abroad by supporting dozens of leaders in their journey as change makers on an annual basis. The leaders who we support, they represent a diverse set of backgrounds and they operate in some of the world's most challenging places. But something that unites them across cultures, languages, regions, and political ideology is the fact that they are young. They are what we call the next generation of leaders. But there's a little bit of a problem with calling them that next generation because they are already leading and innovating on some of the world's toughest challenges. They are the generation of now, and they are the ones we must include in the important conversations surrounding things like democracy, equality, conflict resolution, and climate change. A failure to do so will result in a failure to solve the problems of not just today, but also tomorrow. Today, we have an incredible panel of young leaders who are defying norms and expectations, and they're advocating for issues and policies that don't just benefit their generation, but the entire global community. I say they're defying norms because young people are especially marginalized and left out of the policymaking and decision-making process. They are often overlooked and dismissed. Yet over half of the world's population is under 40. We need to ask ourselves why we don't pay attention to one of the largest constituencies in the global community. Because simply put, young people are not just excluded from the table where decisions are being made, they're being turned off from actively engaging with or trusting in democracy. Yet as you will hear today, they offer some of the most promising and innovative solutions to the challenges we all, who are gathered here today, work on a day-to-day basis. You will hear their stories, their work, how it relates to global challenges, and how you can support this new generation of leaders to take on and solve some of these challenges. It is now my pleasure to introduce our incredible panel of leaders who are, remarkably, all under the age of 40 and doing some really cool work to defend democracy, push back against authoritarianism, and ensure that incoming generations have the freedom to determine their own futures. The U.S. Special Envoy for Global Youth Issues, Abby Finkenauer, is the top expert and envoy at the State Department for including youth in our foreign policy initiatives and working to solve some of the challenges that they face in countries around the world. Prior to her appointment by President Joe Biden, she had a remarkable tenure of service in politics. At 24, she was elected to the Iowa House of Representatives, and at 28, she became the second youngest woman ever elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She is joined on stage by Daria, a 2024 McCain Global Leader who currently lives in New York and originally comes from Belarus. Daria is a media innovation specialist focusing on AI applications in journalism and democratic development. And finally, Cheung is a 2023 McCain Global Leader and a globally recognized democracy activist from Hong Kong. He is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Flow HK Media, which aims to fight against Chinese authoritarian propaganda. He has testified before the United States Congress numerous times as it relates to Chinese influence in Asia as well as globally, and he took to the streets in Hong Kong to organize protests against the government's turn toward China and authoritarianism. Sunny is currently in exile here in the United States and faces prosecution should he return to his native Hong Kong. Abby, Daria, Sunny, we are really grateful for your time today, and we are so honored to have each of you here to share your work. Abby, I want to start with you. You became the second youngest woman ever elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. We talk a lot here at the McCain Institute about answering the call to serve a cause greater than oneself. You've certainly done that. What drove you to answer this call and enter a life of public service at such a young age?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, especially with these extraordinary young leaders who've been fellows of the McCain Institute. Truly an honor. And I know some of you, I think in this audience, I've gotten to meet before, and it just means a lot to get to be part of this. So for me, answering the call at the young age of 24 was a lot of honestly looking around and realizing that I didn't see myself in my government. I didn't see other people like me. I had a lot of friends. I remember I grew up in a little town a little bit north of Dubuque in Sherrill, with more cows than people. I went to high school in Dubuque, Iowa, and I remember after I went to college and came back, I saw so many young people starting to leave, and I thought, well, part of it is probably because they actually don't feel like they're having their voices heard. And I had worked in the State House as a legislative assistant before that when the seat came open to run. It had been held for 25 years by the same person. Actually, he took the seat the year I was born. And so there were a lot of folks around me going, you should consider this, you know, the policy. And at first I was like, I don't know, right? I'm 24, about to be 25. Is this really the right thing? And then I just started thinking about it, and I realized that, again, if I don't do it, who's going to? And I started seeing these policies where I was really worried about the fact that they were affecting my friends, my family, and my neighbors, and they weren't being talked about in a personal way anymore. And to me, when I ran for Congress, like my tagline literally was, it's personal, because it was. And I think that's what it should be, truly what it is for young people around the globe who are interested in these spaces. They know their why. They're getting involved because they do care, because it is affecting them personally, their friends personally, their families personally, and it's the drive for them to get up and use their voice. And that's what we should continue to look for, right? All around the globe, whether it's in the US or, again, in other countries, encouraging these young people to be able to use their voices, to be in those positions of power, of not just caring about policy, but becoming policymakers. And so, again, it's just finding that why, making it personal, and doing everything you can to make a change where you can.
Thank you. Sunny, you were born in Hong Kong at a time when there was relative freedom, and as you got older, you saw that freedom decrease, and Hong Kong move more towards a hardline autocracy environment. And as you saw this change occur, you really chose not to sit on the sidelines. You were literally out in the streets protesting. Why did you feel it important as a teenager to step up and push back against a dictator and take on a fight that is really normally decided by folks who are 2 or 3 times our age?
First of all, thank you for having me. This is really a great honor to be here. And then to respond to your question, I would say, I think we feel obligated to first of all to help our city. And when we see that our city is now, being destroyed and then dismantled incrementally by Beijing governments, and then, based on the love for the city, we feel that we should do something, and we are very passionate to do something. So I think this is the key to talk about leadership, and especially for the youth people, right? I think age should not be a barrier to leadership. Actually, we should really utilize our passions, our youth, and then to help our city and to help everyone in the city to achieve democracy and protect the freedom and democracy. So when I was like at the age of 15, I chose to stand up and then to fight against the Hong Kong government, because they tried to impose a national education bill and trying to brainwash and indoctrinate the whole generation of Hong Kong youth in Hong Kong. They try to tell that CCP is a great party. They have done nothing wrong in history. They try to really eradicate the history and revise that with the version provided by Beijing. And when I was young, I already, not just me, but many peers of mine, we already felt like this is unacceptable, right? Because this will, of course, first of all, impact our education, and we don't like that. We want to have critical thinking, right? We don't want to be brainwashed. And secondly, I would say the student comes after us will also being influenced by this problematic curriculum. So this is not something we want to see, and we stood up. And I think this is all based on passion, love, and courage, and we are never trying to belittle ourselves by only using the age to see that. Yeah.
Thank you. Daria, I think it's different country, different dictator, but similar story to what Sunny experienced, where in your native Belarus, you saw this push towards authoritarianism, a crackdown on freedoms, and I'd be interested to hear why you, at a young age, also stepped up to push back against this.
good question. Oh, it works. Perfect. So I was born in the Soviet Union. And after it collapsed, we had this very short transitional period when we had like a little bit of democracy. And in '94, we unfortunately, democratically, elected Alexander Lukashenko, who promised to fight corrupted establishment and restore Soviet greatness. Well, you know how it goes. Right after he started to dismantle very fresh, very young checks and balances. He started to eliminate opposition, sometimes physically. And the consequences of that is that, like, I'm 36 now, and Lukashenko is in power for 30 years. Can you imagine? So, like, I don't remember the time when he was not in power. And very ironically, for a person who, from the dictatorship, I absolutely loved media. I loved making media. So I established my first magazine when I was around 20. It was very opinionated, digital magazine, without any kind of self-censorship. And its popularity grew over time. And in 2015, Belarusian government decided to establish this type of, the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Information. It developed this digital law to censor the internet. And basically my magazine became the first target. They blocked several articles, and it provoked a very interesting Streisand effect when it went completely viral, which was a great PR campaign, to be honest. But I started to have this talks with people from the government, KGB. They didn't even bother to rename it. So, it became very uncomfortable for me. And luckily, I got a scholarship the same year, and I went to study abroad to get my master. And to be honest, I never came back to live in the country. But my newsrooms kept doing their job in Belarus, and until 2020, right? And 2020 was the year when Belarus was on the front pages of every major newspaper because of unprecedented protests in the history of the country. And in my opinion, there were two factors for that. First of all, it was COVID, and government and Lukashenko mismanaged it horribly. He would say things like, "COVID doesn't exist because I don't see it," or that you can cure it with vodka and tractor for some reason. Well, still better than bleach, I guess. But, a second factor was that it coincided with presidential elections. And, people got completely outraged because, he rigged it for the 5th time, I think, and the number was something 80% votes. So we had this incredible protest. People realized that they can organize society horizontally much better than the government. They were, distributing masks. They were saving people, and the government looked absolutely ridiculous in the contrast with civil society. It was smart and organized. And we had this cathartic moment in our history when anchors and diplomats and military people, they started to resign like crazy. They were taking the side of people. And at this moment, according to all the political scientists and Gene Sharp or whoever, there was no way that the protest of such scale fails at this point. We won, right? There's no going back. But unfortunately, Putin had completely different plans for this territory of Belarus, and as you know, Lukashenko provided the territories to attack Kiev in 2022. So he sent a replacement for propaganda, for military, and the repressions were absolutely brutal. Dozens of thousands of people went through jail and torture. Hundreds of thousands left the country. And you know, we are like really traumatized as a nation, to be honest, at this point. And my business partner got arrested, so I kind of like took it upon myself to take care of my teams, to evacuate, to fundraise, to you know, to help them in every possible way I could. And you're asking why? Why do we do this? And why young people? I don't really think we have a choice. You know, like I'm not a person who's like naturally drawn towards any type of activism. Like I just love doing media, you know, like that was my passion. And I love to transmit certain values through those media. And, you know, the government just didn't like those values. So that's it, you know. That's the situation we're in.
Thanks, Daria. It really is an honor for the Institute to be able to support and work with you and Sunny in the incredible challenges that you face. It brings me to the next question, which is there's a lot of data that supports the fact that young people are affected by challenges in the global community at a greater rate than other generations. There's also a lot of data that shows how underrepresented people under the age of 40 are in the decision-making process. Abby, you've had the chance in your role to travel to every corner of the globe, it seems like, and speak with these frontline youth activists who are really the ones experiencing these challenges. And so I'd love for you to be able to share a little bit about the conversations that you've had with some of these youth activists and the challenges that you're seeing.
Yeah, this is so interesting. So the role is Special Envoy for Global Youth Issues, and the reality is, when I first heard that, I was like, okay, that's so funny to me, because literally every issue is a youth issue. I mean, absolutely everything. And the challenges that young people are facing touch every area, from global security to food security to climate change, you name it, and they are involved in these spaces. The reality is, though, the barriers that they're facing in these spaces are acute and different, again, depending on where they're at. But there are three kind of core things that we've seen just regardless of what region they're in. And three of those barriers are the institutional barriers to actually having their voices heard, right? And entering government. And I mean, that's here in the US, that's here all over the globe, and they're different, right? Sometimes it's money and access, right, to being able to run for office, or even just this idea that you can run, right? Are they even in a democracy where that is a possibility? So the institutional ones are very real and very different. But then you have the cultural barriers, right? The ones where, depending on who you are in that country, in that space, if you feel even safe enough to be able to take that next step, or even when you are ready and you do want to try something that maybe other folks in maybe even your own family, right, could never imagine doing, the pushback you can get. I mean, this is something, again, we even deal with here in the US. I remember at 24 talking to my mom and saying I was going to run for office, and she looked at me like, are you nuts? Like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? Right? That's so gross. Politics is awful. And I mean, for part of that, and I thought about it later, and she, you know, got on board pretty quickly, but what that really was fear, right? It was fear, yes, for me and safety, all the things, but also just something that she could never have envisioned herself doing, right? And just what I dealt with there, again, you have young people in every corner of the globe kind of going through that same stuff, where it can take their family and the people who love them most a little extra time to catch up with what they're trying to do and their drive to make a change, right? And then there's also those personal barriers that young people are putting on themselves as well, of what they think they can do, especially if somebody like them has never done it before, right? And they can't even picture that. And so that's where, I mean, I know the work the McCain Institute's doing, a lot of different civil societies doing, we've been trying to do at State, is really kind of talking about those stories, those out-of-the-box stories of where somebody like them hasn't, or did, all of a sudden did do it, and it could be them, right? And getting them to see themselves in those spaces. So that's a big piece of what they're dealing with. But then I would say the other piece that I didn't realize would be such a core area of what we worked in until I started just having honest conversations with young people, whether they were visiting here to the US or I was visiting them out at Post. Was the amount of online hate and harassment they are facing when they are using their voice. It is horrific. It is getting worse literally every month. I think a couple years ago there was some data saying it was the first year in 30 years where the number of women running for office or in office around the globe actually decreased after steadily going up for the last 30 years. And part of that is directly related to that online hate, harassment, sexualization, the horrible stuff, again, I dealt with in office and running for office in the US, and that is happening everywhere, in every country. And it hasn't mattered where I've gone. If there are young women in the room or people who are just like underrepresented in their democracies and they're trying to use their voice, this issue has come up. And I think it's one that is going to need a lot more attention in the coming years if we want representative democracies. Because to have representative democracies, you have to make sure that all folks feel like, safe being able to run for office, being part of that. And if they don't, we're not going to have those. So anyway.
When we were backstage, you and I were talking about our families a little bit and how hard it is to get our parents to understand the work that we do, to get them to necessarily take an interest in what we do. We're often competing with the interest of the Packers, the Green Bay Packers. Both of our families
Thanksgiving conversation.
Are big fans.
Yes.
And it's hard enough to get our own families interested in this. And I think that actually ties into getting people in Washington and the international development and foreign policy communities interested in supporting youth. And not only interested in supporting them, but bringing them into the conversation. Why should this audience care about the challenges that youth face and bringing them to the table when we're making decisions that affect them directly?
Well, you should care, and the entire globe should care, because we are facing so many challenges, like I just said, in all of those different spaces. And quite literally, it's the young people I've had the biggest honor of my life to get to know, to get to hear their stories, who are coming up with the best solutions out there and how to deal with those challenges. But it's on us, right, to make those spaces for them to be heard, and not just be heard, right? Like, that's easy. Yes, like you can have panels, you can have young people on them, you can hear their stories, but then where are the resources behind those ideas as well, and making sure that they're connected to those spaces where they can actually make that difference and take those ideas to the next level. They're also the most, I would say, open in terms of wanting to make connections around the globe as well. Much less interested in staying just tied to their own country or their own region. They want to connect. They want to be able to share those ideas. And again, they're more global, more excited to tackle those challenges. And we just have to make the space for them to be able to do that. And again, those resources, putting those behind them as well to make those come to fruition.
I think often, to your point in foreign policy, when we think about issues affecting young people or youth, we kind of brush them aside as micro or insignificant to broader issues going on in a country, region, or globally. But in reality, this is not the case. And young folks, I think, can really be a bellwether for future challenges that may be on the horizon. Daria, can you talk about your experience in Belarus and what you and your fellow young leaders were seeing as it relates to the rise of authoritarianism and nationalism in Europe, and kind of how this ties to the broader issue of Putin's influence within the region?
Right. Well, we're the first generation that is post-Soviet and digital native. And basically all the grassroots initiatives, all the political campaigns were led by people under 40. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, our president-elect, she was basically only 37 when she replaced her husband as a presidential candidate after he got arrested. And we have all this amazing, like my academic friends call it, infrastructure freedom. Apart from digital media in exile, we have a hacker group called Cyber Partisans that leak very efficiently information about how government commits crimes against its own people. We have this incredible, bold, visionary project called New Belarus, which is basically an attempt to build a fully functioning virtual state for an exiled nation with its own economic support. This is an incredible like democratic experiment and simulation. I'm really fond of it. And you know, like if you look at the latest Chatham House polls, the largest group who lives in Belarus of young people, it's like open Democrats, progressives, who lean very heavily towards European Union, and their views they like very correlated with the media consumption. They overwhelmingly consume independent media. And you know, like after the invasion of Ukraine, Belarus lost a lot of international support, unfortunately. And those independent media in exile, they barely surviving, they're barely making it. And on the other hand, we have Kremlin with a very sophisticated propaganda machine, using AI, using all kind of like unethical ways to manipulate people in neighboring countries. And like usually Kremlin, you know, it doesn't have an ideology to export. Like I think this audience knows very well that the goal is to provoke unrest and violence in liberal democracies, whatever destabilizes the situation. So Belarusians are like, they genuinely scared, you know, because we escaped authoritarianism, but you know, what about other countries? It's really tough to predict, like if you're gonna be safe in the next country that we're gonna go to. And for Belarusians, it's like the global map looks like places we can go and places we cannot go. And in recent years, like we cross out countries from the map, you know. And we had this case in Serbia. The Belarusian film director got almost extradited from Serbia. And it took a huge international effort to keep Serbia from doing that, including, you know, support letters from international stars like Pedro Almodovar. And we still feel safe in the European Union and the US, but what about tomorrow? Where do we go then? This is a very scary and serious question.
Thank you. Sunny, I think when people hear about protests and movements being led by youth, people might roll their eyes at it. There is an inherent ability by older generations and even young generations to turn a blind eye to what young folks are doing and what they're advocating for. But Hong Kong was a little different. It was very evident early on that the protests were being led by youth, and the world really took notice. Why do you think this was, and how did you as a young leader really tie what was going on in Hong Kong to broader geopolitical issues that got the attention of the global community?
Thank you, Scott. I think this is a very good question. I mean, not just me, I believe 100,000 or even millions of youth people in Hong Kong, we were very fed up with the discourse and then perception that so young people in Hong Kong were not capable and you should really find a decent job instead of like doing all this kind of like activism, advocacy, etc. So if you haven't really been Hong Kong or heard of Hong Kong is really, is even New York than New York, I would say. So one famous saying is that actually, if you want to understand Hong Kong, look into the title of our city leader. So it's not governor, not prime minister, not mayor, it's called chief executive. So Hong Kong is like a big company, right? And the city leader is the CEO. So I mean, so this is really kind of the embodiment of like capitalism and neoliberalism, right? And this is what Hong Kong is, right? Hong Kong is famous for economic developments, international financial development, right? And then people should all work in the iBanker. We don't really need to care about politics, right? I mean, just earn a fortune and then you can ignore all the problem in Hong Kong in the city. But the young people, we feel like that's not the case. And we are so fed up being told that we should be an iBanker, we should be an attorney, a lawyer to serve the financial industry. We see the problem, we want to address that. So that's why I think the young people rise up and they led so many young movements in Hong Kong. And especially in Hong Kong, so when it was like 2019, 5 years ago, so I was leading all of the Hong Kong college student unions, mobilizing more than 100,000 student activists, and then we organize a student delegation to do international advocacy. So within a month, and then we travel to US, UK, Germany, EU headquarters, and Australia, Canberra, and then no other Hong Kong political leaders older than us have ever been Canberra. If you have been Canberra, you know there's nothing there. But the point is, so we even try to reach out to Canberra. We talk to everyone within a month. We show our agency. We show our passion. We know that the city was in a very dire situation. So we went everywhere in order to tell our story. This kind of like agency, passions, I think this is what the Hong Kong youth has been demonstrating to the world. So yeah, I mean, the world is very surprised that the movement was led by Hong Kong young people instead of the more perhaps seasoned politician. But again, I think age shouldn't be a barrier to leadership. What matters is always about your courage and the ability and your agency to act. So I think this is what matters.
Thank you, Sonny. Abby, you've now been in this role as special envoy for 2 years, and I'm sure you've talked with thousands of young people around the world. As you've traveled and talked to these folks, as it relates to global issues, what are you hearing from young people, and how does their work and their advocacy tie into the global challenges that we see happening around the world?
Yes, thank you again. So to help put in context, part of my vehicle of being able to talk to young people all over the globe in these different regions are because the State Department has something called, we kind of dub them the Y programs. I don't know if y'all are familiar with these. You may be familiar with, probably the most well-known is YALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative. It got started in 2010, and from there were many other regional ones that got started. YSEALI is our Young Southeast Asia Leaders Initiative. That was I think that's the second largest. And then YTELI is our young leader, is the transatlantic leaders. So our European, YLI is our young leaders of the Americas, so like Western Hemisphere. Yes. See, YLI felt, love it. And then also YPL is our Young Pacific leaders. We just launched YSALI, that's our Young South Asia Leaders Initiative. And then the Middle Eastern one, it actually doesn't have a Y, but I consider it like in the same thing. It's MEPI, so our Middle Eastern Partnership. We got to give it a Y somewhere. But anyway, moral of the story, I've had the extraordinary opportunity to get to interact with these young people who've been part of these different fellowship programs, some of them over the last 10 years, so alums of these. And what I know and understand in terms of that global issue space is, again, every region is very, very different, and they are working on different things. It's why the connection of these different regions is so important. Like, for example, in South Asia, I mean, it is being able to find jobs and economic opportunity is by far the thing that keeps young people up at night. It is also the driving factor of why they may leave their country, right? However, if you're talking about YPL, our Young Pacific leaders, it is climate change all day, every day, because it's absolutely existential, and they're literally dealing with the fact that their homes may very well disappear, right? And so that is the issue driving them every single day. And then you go to Switzerland and you're talking to young people, and this just recently happened, where we asked them to go into different corners about the issues they care about the most. And I had literally just gotten back from Sri Lanka and Nepal, where we talked about economic opportunity, entrepreneurship, that type of thing. That was like our whole focus. And then again, we get to Switzerland, and we have this economic opportunity space where if that's the thing that they're worried about in jobs, go over to that corner. If it's mental health, go to another corner. If it's climate change, go to another. If it's civic engagement, running for office, go to another. And not one young person walked into the economic opportunity corner, not one, when literally every student I talked to, or not just students, but every participant I talked to in the last two countries probably would have been in that space. But they were in the mental health space or the climate change space. And what that tells me is that, and what I take back to my colleagues, is you cannot go into different youth leadership things or programs or engaging with young people being like, this is exactly what I want to talk about. This is exactly what we should do. You've got to listen to the young people, right? You've got to talk to them about what they care about, why they care about it, and then figure out how to expand what they care about by connecting them to young people in different regions who are so passionate and working in those spaces. And so anyway, that would be, I would say, one of the biggest things that we should all think about as we're engaging young people is not just going in with our own agendas of what we think they should talk about, but just ask them, have those conversations, and make those spaces for them, again, to come up with those ideas to tackle it.
Thank you. So, Daria, autocrats, we talked about this earlier today. Autocrats are really good at sticking together. And they've got this great playbook where they support each other, they learn from each other. Democracies aren't as great at this, but we at the McCain Institute see a lot of potential in young leaders and activists that are able to work across borders together and across regions and cultures in the defense of democracies. When I talked to you and when I met you earlier this year, you seemingly knew every young leader, whether it was in Europe, Asia, or Latin America, that's pushing back against authoritarians. And I think young people can really be a model for how we can network, connect together, and work together on some of these global challenges. So how do you think young folks can better connect with and support each other? And what role do governments, international organizations, and NGOs have to play in building and maintaining these networks that can really support the common defense of democracy, freedom, and human rights?
That's a good question. So, like, I met all those people that you mentioned through all this scholarships and fellowships. Thanks, State Department. Yeah. So, and we work on a lot of common problems. And we speak at all these conferences when we meet. It's like, yeah, let's collaborate. Let's do something together. But then after we go back to our established workflows, in 99% of cases, nothing happens. So, it's a separate job to coordinate those efforts. And I think at this particular moment of a very rapid technological development, AI development, it is absolutely crucial to coordinate technological efforts and establish some sort of a tech hub with all the activists. Because the ideas we're talking, like network state for exiles, really powerful AI assistants for independent media that truly help to fight propaganda. Those are very complex and very expensive solutions. And I understand that it's really hard to invest. Like, it doesn't make sense to invest so much money and effort into, such products for one local context. But again, the problems are very similar. In Belarus, in Hong Kong, in Venezuela, we know that we can get together and work on common solutions. And I think US, as a land of innovation, with all your AI labs, we should collaborate. I don't see enough effort right now in this direction. And maybe US think tanks and the government and places like McCain Institute could become such a mediator and actually, contribute into development of such solutions. So, yeah, I think it would be having like a huge impact.
Yeah, agreed. Sunny, I think you're kind of an exception and not the norm when it comes to young people being able to come and testify before the United States House of Representatives on geopolitical issues. And I would love to pick your brain and talk about, from your experience, what can organizations and governments be doing here in Washington to elevate the voices and ideas of young people, and not just elevate those voices, but include them in the decision making?
That's a very great question again. I mean, I think President Biden and then the State Department are doing amazing work by trying to institutionalize the youth voice into the administration. I think, we can discuss this issue from a very macro or micro style, but then the point is, at the end of the day, you have to institutionalize all the mechanism and channels to ensure that policymakers, when they draft policy, they will actually try to listen what the youth is thinking and talking about. And actually, it's great to directly to bring in the youth to the system to understand and help. Direct the policy. I think this is really important, right? And at the same time, I would say there are some great examples I have seen. For example, I think earlier this summer, actually NATO, for example, NATO organized the first youth summit in Miami. I think this is a very good example to see, to help the young people to amplify their influence, amplify their voices, and also to ensure that on different kind of issue, there will always, their voices will always be heard. So I think this is important. And at the same time, I think even though, the White House has a lot of, like, for example, Technology Council has the National US AI Safety Institute right now. I think it's under the Department of Energy or Commerce. And then I think you have, as we are entering the 21st century, when we see the technological revolution, we need people who are really technological savvy. And I think young people can play a role in that. And this is all matters, right? Why should we listen to young people? And what is the strength of young people? We were born with this technology, right? We understand how this works. So when we talk about emerging technology, some emerging threats in the 21st century, I think we should include them naturally, right? To absorb their opinion and to see how they think about what we have to face and what we should deal with, and what are some of the policy recommendations in the coming 21st century.
Abby, you talked about how important it is to listen to young people. How can Washington and the international community do a better job of listening and then go that step further and include them in the decision-making process?
Oh, how much time do we have?
Not that much.
I have so many thoughts about this after taking on this role. And just to also kind of put this in perspective, before I took on this role as Special Envoy for Global Youth at State, I had not had the chance to work as closely in the youth space, specifically not the international youth space. I had barely been out of the country. My mom just got her passport this year, right? So this was not something I had a lot of access to. And I had been in Congress even, right? And there was not a lot of connection to state at that point. Well, what started to happen, which I kind of am grateful for that now, because it allowed me to go in with sort of really fresh eyes, if that makes sense, and just listen and get real raw feedback from young people about their frustrations of how they haven't felt heard. And one of the things that keeps sticking out to me is that you hear young people all the time. They're like, yeah, we're in all these youth advisory councils, all these councils and it's always them, about 20 of them or 30 of them, where they're like, yeah, we meet every month and we're in a room and we talk to each other. And that's, and it's easy to check a box and say you have your advisory council, but they're like, but we're experts in different things, right? And what good does it do to just put 20 or 30 young people together and have them talk to each other when they are experts, they have all these ideas, and we have to incorporate them into those higher level spaces, right? To actually have their ideas heard and incorporate them into those specific issue areas. And I think that's one of the biggest recommendations I have is just, we hear this all the time, right? This performative thing. We gotta keep thinking about that, of how it's not just performative, it's not just checking a box, it's how are we actually lifting those voices in that kind of intergenerational space as well, that I think all government agencies could do more of. I think there are ones trying in different ways. We've tried some different things at state, but it involves really listening. And I think civil society can do a better job. I think the UN spaces can do a better job. This is all stuff that finally I think there's a lot of energy behind, but it requires having real, honest, vulnerable conversations with young people and also making them feel comfortable sharing their real unvarnished thoughts. Kind of leave your title at home, right? Don't go in there being fancy and scaring them of, not wanting to hear what being afraid of saying something. You just gotta be honest, be vulnerable, and they'll be vulnerable back to you. And I think that to me is just my biggest recommendation for anybody working in this space. Is just listen to them and hear how they want to be involved, and then go do it.
Thank you. And thank you to all three of you. I hope that after this conversation, you view youth in a different way and you take the opportunity to include them in your work, because Sunny, Daria, Abby are just a sample of the incredible young leaders that exist all around the world who are providing innovation to the challenges that we all face. And so I really hope as you walk away from today, you think about these three incredible leaders, the work that you're doing, and work to support them and include them in the decision-making process. So thank you to the three of you for spending some time with us today. Thanks.